Welcome to The Brain Plate, the podcast blending nutrition and psychology to help you thrive. Whether you're trying to improve your focus, reduce anxiety, or live a comprehensive, holistic lifestyle, let's dig in.
Hello and welcome back to our podcast. I'm Leah here with my co-host Marit.
Hello.
And today we are going to be talking about eating behaviors, specifically intuitive eating, emotional eating, restrained or restrictive eating behaviors. These are three very different approaches, however, how we relate to food, and they have a significant impact on our physical and mental health.
Yeah, so the way we have structured today's episode is we kind of talk about what the three different eating behaviors are. And then we also talk about what research has found about these behaviors, whether they're positive impacts or negative impacts. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit of a summary and conclusion of the three. So yeah, we'll start out by talking about emotional eating. What is emotional eating? You might take a guess when you hear the word emotional eating. It's eating in the response to usually negative emotions, such as stress, sadness, or anxiety. And this food isn't going to be carrots or celery. It's usually sugary foods or salty snacks or comfort foods that are quick to eat and also give us this momentary sense of relief, a quick fix of serotonin, as we may call it. But Leah, what is the problem with emotional eating?
Yeah, so the problem with emotional eating is that it has strongly been linked to overeating and weight gain, especially when it becomes a habitual way to cope with your feelings and emotions. Research has also shown emotional eating is connected to higher overall body dissatisfaction. So it's kind of a big problem that's, when we say the big key word with this is habitual, it's when it becomes that habit of that is your coping mechanism. Having one day of just eating all your favorite food and then, returning to healthy is not what we're discussing. It is that chronic, habitual way of coping with your emotions.
Yeah. And this emotional eating is when we eat to regulate our emotions rather than for physical hunger. So let's say you're stressed and you're craving this sugar, or you're craving this salty snack, or the sugar is going to make you feel momentarily better, but you're not actually hungry. I think a great example for this is if you have a bag of chips on your lap, it is very easy to finish the whole bag even though you just had dinner an hour ago. It's because it tastes so good and your body is asking for more, even though you don't really need it. This emotional eating disrupts our natural ability to listen to our body's cues, because your body gives cues of when we're hungry and what we would need. But doing this type of emotional eating can disrupt this natural pathway.
Yeah, and emotional eating normally is combined with restrictive eating, such as dieting, and it can create this cycle that becomes extremely hard to break. And it is this kind of like binge restrict eating cycle. Um, the emotional eating not necessarily is a direct binge, but it's like you eat due to some sort of emotion and then you recognize that you overeat or you eat less than healthy foods, and then you go through this phase right after that where you don't eat, or you don't eat enough, or whatever it might be for you. So it is often it is a cyclical kind of behavior pattern.
Yeah. And that is the part on the actual eating part, but we also have a side of it that is the way you feel about yourself. And as Leah said, this emotional eating often leads to a bigger dissatisfaction of one's own body or body image. And in turn, research has actually shown that self esteem and self compassion habits can help reduce emotional eating, suggesting that when we feel better about ourselves and we feel better about our position that we are in, or our environment, or just our lives, we're less likely to turn to food for comfort because we are allowed to get that comfort from outside and not just from the food that we are ingesting.
Yeah, and it's very important to understand that as much as research has shown this, there's another kind of complex layer to just eat when you're emotional and it becomes a habit. In fact, cultural differences, or there are cultural differences in emotional eating behaviors. So, for example, women in the United States are more likely to engage in emotional eating than women in Japan. Additionally, British women report higher levels of emotional eating and eating related issues when compared to Japanese. And all of this came from a study done by Markey et al. In 2023. So we'll post these research if you want to, and we encourage you to read through them on your own. But they also found that people in Western cultures may engage in emotional eating more often than those in non Western cultures. And the factors influencing emotional eating may vary quite a bit across cultural context. So it's something very important to keep in mind as well.
So this is interesting, right? Because the research shows that women in the United States are more likely to emotional eat than women in Japan, for example. But then it doesn't really go into the why. And I'm always more interested in the why. It's like, okay, research, yes, has shown this, but why is it that women in the United States are more likely to emotional eat than in Japan? What could be the reason for it?
I would say again, there I've not done the exact research in this, so this is just my personal opinion.
It's speculating.
Yeah.
We're
But I think there could be multiple reasons. Obviously, lifestyle and culture. The U.S. is a lot more go 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 culture. The U.S. also has, I would believe, to have a lot more food, nutritious food. I don't even know how to say this. The food here just sucks. Um,
fair enough.
the level of the quality of food in the U.S. I believe would be less than in
Okay.
Japan. And lastly, which is interesting because it's not really done on men, and I would love to see a comparison. But I think
Yeah.
that the women's the female menstrual cycle and the um, hormonal regulation what plays quite a big role, or I would assume could play a big role into this. Um,
Yeah. I mean, probably, maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that there's still the difference between women in different cultures. Because even though there are different cultures, women still have menstrual cycles. Um,
yeah, but I think the disruption is higher in the U.S. than it would be in another
mhm.
country.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah,
I'd
and
also like to
again,
see kind of I don't know. I'd have to go back and look because I can't recall off the top of my head. Maybe you remember um, what the what this like significant the statistical significance was between these two.
Ooh, I don't remember. I would have to look back also.
Yeah. Like was it like slight was it like significant but the effect sizes were small, or was it like no, this is like significant across all and like this is actually like a pretty clear difference?
Yeah, it was, let me see. Correlations for study variable, body satisfaction, and emotional eating had a significance difference of negative 0.28
Was that the R
with,
value?
yeah,
Oh, so it's pretty significant
yeah.
with P set
And,
at oh 0.05.
oh, sorry?
With P set at 0.05.
At 0.001.
Okay, so yeah, these were clear differences.
Yeah. And this is not between cultures, but this is just a general correlation between body satisfaction and emotional eating.
Oh,
So you do see that people who emotionally eat have significantly less satisfaction of their bodies.
yeah.
And we'll go into restrained eating and intuitive eating. And to give you a little spoiler, restrained eating and body satisfaction also had a significant negative correlation, and intuitive eating and body satisfaction had a positive significant correlation. So we'll go into why.
Yeah. So now that Mart has spoiled the story for us, but
Yeah.
it's important to keep this in mind as we shift
Yeah.
into dieting and diet culture, which is more
Yeah.
formally known as restrained or restrictive eating.
Yeah, because if I can interrupt you real quick, I do think that knowing the statistics behind it makes it more sense. Like it makes more sense in hearing like, oh, now I understand why people also have less body satisfaction when restrained eating is happening. So
Yeah, yeah.
continue.
Like the numbers are always good to put into perspective. Like I said, the numbers that Mark
Yeah.
read out, those are quite definitive numbers. It's not like gray area numbers. Like they're quite definitive. So
No,
it goes to show that these relationships are,
quite strong.
yes.
Yeah, so as Leah said, dieting culture, more formally known as restrained or restrictive eating, also mentioned by Markey et al. In 2023. This refers to the strict control of food intake, and you limit what and how much someone eats in an effort to lose or maintain weight. This approach often involves a combination of counting calories, avoiding certain foods, and sticking to a strict meal plan. However, Leah, what is the downside?
Why do I always have to do the downside?
I don't know. It's just the way this turns out.
Yeah. So there obviously, as we have mentioned previously, uh, the restrictive eating is often thought of as a foundational way to help people lose weight. Calories in, like the common thing, calories in versus calories out. To lose weight, you want less calories in than calories going out. However, purposeful restrictive eating can lead to an increased focus on food, body image and shape dissatisfaction, and an overall lower sense of well being. And the overall idea is that we focus more on controlling our relationship with food, the more we disconnect from our natural hunger and
Satiety?
satiety cues. I had a mental blank here for a hot minute.
That's okay. Yeah, so what that means is basically the more we want to control the way we eat and how we feel about it, the more we're actually disconnecting with what we are feeling. Not only is that a downside, there also has been some research showing that dietary restraint also can be linked to disordered eating behaviors. For example, bulimia, binge eating, or this was a term I haven't heard of before, yo-yo dieting. Do you know what it is?
Yeah, so yo-yo dieting is like the common phrase for the cycle that we were talking about earlier. It's a
Yeah.
cycle of kind of like binge eating and then going through periods of strict diet
Like the
patterns.
yo-yo up and
Yeah.
down.
It's different than bulimia, whereas, or I believe it to be different, slightly different than bulimia, whereas bulimia, it's sort of uncontrollable, to an
Yeah.
extent where like you binge and then you, in some form, um, expel the food that you've eaten. Yo-yo dieting, you don't have that same expulsion of food immediately. However,
Okay.
it's a conscious decision to restrict immediately after some binge. So, like for example, you go out. Very very basic example. You go out with friends and have a night out. You drink alcohol, perhaps. You eat processed food. You eat more than you normally eat. You kind of overeat, etc. And then that next day, you immediately, instead of having your normal amounts of food, you immediately only have one meal a day that
Okay.
day. It's that purposeful restriction after something that, one
Yeah.
night out is not going to hurt you.
Okay. That makes sense. So those are disordered eating behaviors, but another disordered eating behavior could be um, food cravings and emotional eating when an attempt at this restraint or dieting fails. So that is also something you often see people can't abide by their diet, or they're just not able to hold on that diet. So then what happens is they crave more and they eat more, which then in turn doesn't help them either.
Yeah.
Um, and
And
sorry, go
no,
ahead.
but
Okay. Um, while some of this research suggests that this connection is not always consistent over time, long term restraint or long term dieting has been associated with a lower body satisfaction, reduced self esteem, and poorer overall well being, which is the opposite effect of what dieting should or you want out of dieting. Because oftentimes people go into diets wanting to have a higher body satisfaction, an increased self-esteem, and a better overall well-being. But the research shows the opposite.
yeah, it's one of those things. A good example of this is bodybuilders. Um, they they do not normally listen to their natural physiological hunger and fullness cues. They rely on a uh, eating pattern that is very strict, and then they also further restrict calories, because they want to lose a bunch of weight, and they also want to gain muscle for their performances. Um, and so overall, like for short term, normally it's not always, like Mart said, consistent with these negative correlations. However, when you get into some behaviors and similar to that of like bodybuilders, where you're doing all this restriction, and to get to be your best, you don't listen to your body anymore. You're listening to this plan on paper.
Yeah.
um you see that they have this dysmorphia about them, about their relationship with their body. And that's seen as they cut, and then as they reverse, it's almost more detrimental as they reverse and they become a more natural healthy weight. They can't accept that.
Yeah.
And this kind of like influences research that's showing that thoughts about dieting or restrictive eating can negatively influence body image concerns and self-esteem, as an example
Yeah.
I just mentioned.
So that's crazy to me that even the thought of dieting can already have this negative influence on your body image. But I guess, if one starts thinking about dieting, it's probably because they are feeling dissatisfied with their current body image.
Yeah, and I think people put so much emphasis on dieting. Dieting in itself is supposed to be short term, it's short lived. It's not supposed to be a chronic relationship to food.
Hmm.
And that's why you often see, or it's often why the cycles of restrictive eating and then overeating. So the whole yo-yo dieting thing is such a massive
Yeah,
problem right now.
I can see that. Yeah. And then when we look at the cultural side, perceptions of dietary restraint and dieting differ. For example, in culture where thinness is highly rewarded, such as through admiration and social success, individuals may be more likely to adopt dietary restraint behaviors. However, cross cultural research on this topic is limited, leaving room for further exploration. So, here again, we're missing kind of a why, but also an explanation, to if there even is a difference in the way we view dieting across the globe.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that um, every culture has its own kind of uniqueness to it,
Yeah,
and every society or every little kind of like imposed subcultural, assumptions that you take
yeah,
on or that you acquire plays into how you view food and your relationship towards food and eating.
yeah. Now, lead off with the last of the three.
So, we've talked about kind of the two negative eating behaviors. Obviously, there's more, but these are like the three major ones. So, those are the two major ones: restrictive eating and then emotional eating. But we're going to look at the flip side. So, what has the positive correlation between body image, eating behavior? And that's intuitive eating. And at its core, intuitive eating is an adaptive eating behavior. It involves listening to your body's natural physiological signals, such as eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. So the idea is very simple. Do not rely on external cues, diet rules or meal plans or whatever it is for you, and just tune in to what your body needs.
The research on this has shown that people who practice intuitive eating tend to have healthier weight levels and a better mental well being. However, intuitive eating is not just about hunger cues. It is also about the rejection of these dieting rules and the constant categorization of foods into good and bad. Um, because if you drink a soda, when you rarely drink a soda, but then you think to yourself while you're drinking the soda, oh, this is so bad. I shouldn't be doing this. Oh my God, I'm getting so fat. But just because I drink a soda, then that is the emotional eating brain that is talking. But if you're craving a soda and you know that usually you have a pretty good, diet where you drink mostly water, maybe every now and then a soda, and you don't feel bad about drinking that soda, this can already change that perspective and change your relationship with the foods that you're and the drinks that you're ingesting.
Yeah, exactly. It's intuitive eating is learning that food is there to nourish you, it's there to sustain you. You have to have food in order to live a healthy life, and everything in moderation is okay.
Hmm.
It's the diet idea or the restrictive eating idea that foods are good and bad, and you can only have X amount of bad foods, and there's a certain ratio between good foods and bad foods that you are allowed to eat. Like that whole mentality is that behavioral and mental challenge that you have to overcome to fully understand what intuitive eating is.
Yeah. So the research actually shows that intuitive eating is linked to greater weight stability, body satisfaction, and even improved mental health. It also shows that the people who practice intuitive eating tend to have a better relationship with their bodies, and they're also able to appreciate their bodies and listen to their needs rather than rigid dieting or using food to cope with emotions. And this kind of extends further than just dieting, but also sleep or rest. If you're exercising a lot and you put a pressure on yourself, like, no, but I have to exercise, when your body is kind of telling you no, then you're going to regret it probably. But if you listen to your body when your body is telling you, hey, I need a day of extra rest, and you take that day to rest, you're going to feel a lot better eventually. So it extends to more than just food, but that's the intuitive side that we want to be clear about, that it's not just knowing what you're eating or knowing what you're eating is good or bad, but more so understanding and listening to the needs of your body.
Yeah, the whole idea of intuitive anything, and like as Mart said, being in tune with your body is the best way to fully understand its needs and how it operates the best. But specifically with intuitive eating, I lost my train of thought here.
It happens. It's okay.
Yes. Specifically with intuitive eating, it's really good to understand that instead of classifying things as good and bad, a better way to classify, if you are someone who likes to make like list or to categorize things to make them make sense, is to say nutrient dense and not nutrient dense. Because that way, as you start understanding the intuitive eating for you, you will be able to put the pieces together of like, if I eat a nutrient dense item or a nutrient dense food, I feel XYZ. If I eat a non nutrient dense thing, I feel XYZ. And then there,
Yeah.
and it's okay to combine them, but it's kind
Yeah.
of better to understand that you are eating to nourish and you're eating for the nutrients. You're not eating good or bad stuff. You're eating to get the nutrition into your body.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I really like that. It has also been shown that interventions that have aimed to reduce harmful dieting behavior um, actually enhance intuitive eating, body satisfaction, and eating concerns. And the evidence also suggests that the intuitive eating may play a role in eating disorder recovery. So that just shows how crucial intuitive eating is for your daily life.
Yeah, and then some cultural research, cross cultural research on intuitive eating is still limited. Um, It's not well researched. However, emerging studies in European countries and Canada highlight that intuitive eating is associated with lower rates of disordered eating and higher levels of that body shape slash image satisfaction. And these findings emphasize more objectively the broad benefits of intuitive eating for your overall physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So more of that holistic, overall positive approach.
To kind of summarize the three major ways of eating that we just discussed before going into the next part, we talked about restrained eating, which is strictly controlling food intake, emotional eating, which is turning to food to cope with feelings, and those are often linked to higher body weight and struggles with mental health. On the other hand, while we just talked about intuitive eating or paying attention to your body's natural hunger and fullness cues has been connected to healthier weight levels and better mental well-being. It shows how tuning into your body's needs can promote a healthier and more balanced lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that that's really well put, and it does summarize very well, kind of like what we've talked about so far.
Yeah. The
Moving,
podcast could have just been 2 minutes.
yeah, this whole thing should have been 2 minutes. But it is good to break down each kind of behavior, broad behavior, and kind of
Yeah.
just see, what are some of the characteristics that align with each of those behaviors. And so, going a little bit more in depth of the intuitive eating and what it is, and the model, the acceptance model of intuitive eating. And the acceptance model of intuitive eating provides a framework for understanding how our relationship with food and our bodies can influence our overall well being. And this model focuses on how intuitive eating can lead to, as we said, that more positive body image shape satisfaction, along with improved eating habits.
There are a couple of key concepts within this model. I'm going to list them and then we're going to go into each of those. You have the intuitive eating as a path to body acceptance. You have body image and intuitive eating, interconnectedness between eating habits and body image, rejecting rigid ideas or rigid dieting, and psychological benefits. So, the first key point, intuitive eating as a path to body acceptance. The acceptance model of intuitive eating, suggests that when individuals practice intuitive eating, they are more likely to develop a positive body image. So that's kind of what we just discussed in the last section as well. And by listening to your body's natural hunger and fullness cues and rejecting the dieting rules, people become more attuned to what their body really needs. This process then can lead to greater self acceptance, where people appreciate their bodies for what they are rather than focusing on perceived flaws or societal standards.
Yeah, and so the next key concept of this model, as Marit mentioned, is body image and intuitive eating. So, one of the core ideas is that body image helps foster, or body acceptance, sorry, helps foster a healthier relationship with food. When we accept our bodies as they are and what they are, rather than constantly striving for an ideal look,
Mm-hmm.
we're less likely to engage in harmful eating behaviors, such as the restrictive dieting or emotional eating. So, this in return supports intuitive eating behaviors where eating becomes more about the physical cues, so hunger and fullness cues, and less about the external pressures um, of our culture and or body dissatisfaction.
The model also emphasizes a two-way relationship between body acceptance and eating behaviors. I mean, as you may have noticed, these key points all connect very well together. Um, but as individuals practice intuitive eating and become more in tune with their bodies, they also tend to feel better about their bodies. The acceptance part. If you accept that your body is the way that it is, you start to feel better about it. And as people develop a more positive body image, they're also more likely to engage in behaviors like intuitive eating, which further reinforces the cycle of well-being. So I really like the phrase the cycle of well-being, because that's what you see. If people start to feel good, they're gonna take better care of themselves, which in turn makes them feel better, which then it just is this cycle of well-being. But it's also where if people feel not as good about themselves, they fuel that idea with maybe the more emotional eating habits or the restrained eating habits, which then they only see downward progress, maybe, which then, is also a cycle of well being, but the negative side of well being.
Yeah, it's one of those where understanding that your body is designed a particular way for a purpose, and whenever we try to change that, normally negative effects come from that.
Yeah.
And so, moving to the fourth, I think it is, concept of this model is something that has been a theme throughout this entire podcast, and that is rejecting the rigid dieting. This model highlights how strict dieting or restrictive eating patterns are often linked to negative body image, lower self esteem, and poor mental health, especially over long periods of time. When people follow these rigid dieting rules, they may feel disconnected from their bodies and their needs. The model
Hmm.
argues that when people let go of the dieting parameters and restraints, they can shift toward eating in a way that aligns with their body's cues and needs, which improves their relationship with both food and self image or body image.
And then lastly, you have the psychological benefits that come from the intuitive eating. According to the model, intuitive eating isn't just the physical health that benefits it, but also your mental health. By reducing the focus on diet, like Leah said, you you can lower anxiety, depression, and stress related to food and body image. Um, so instead of the focusing on the diet, people can engage in a more mindful and self-compassionate approach to eating, which will then lead to lower anxiety, depression, and stress.
Yeah, there like the whole purpose behind this podcast is, understanding how nutrition and psychology kind of mesh together in some areas, and this is a good example of that. And so overall, going through all these key concepts, which are kind of repetitive, but it is clearly outlined within the model. It
Yeah.
helps us understand why focusing on intuitive eating can promote healthier relationship with food and an overall well-being. So
Yeah.
if you, this is obviously, we touched on this very broadly. There's more that goes into this. There's more that goes into the model. So if it's something that you guys are interested in, we can obviously do a more deep dive into these concepts or the model, the concepts, or like one concept in particular, whatever you guys are interested in.
Yeah.
Feel free to let us know.
Yeah. But for now, we're going to wrap up and tell you what all this information means for you and your personal journey with food. So, as we have mentioned many, many times in this podcast, research is showing that intuitive eating is a healthier approach towards a relationship with food. It is associated with a better physical and mental well being, and it encourages a healthy relationship with food. One that is based on listening to your body's signals rather than to control or manipulate your intake.
Yes, but if you find yourself caught in the cycle of emotional eating and or restrictive eating, don't worry. We're going to give you some 7 tips that can help you transition to a more intuitive eating behavior and lifestyle.
Mhm.
So first one is to reject, like to not just say you reject, but to understand why you reject dieting and food rules. One of the first steps is to stop categorizing foods, as we said, into good or healthy and bad or unhealthy. Stop following restrictive diets and instead focus on a more balanced, nutritious way of eating that feels right to your body. And kind of like jot like do like a self reflection after you eat a meal and be like, how's
Yeah.
that make me feel? And then that way it's more of not categorizing into good or bad, but like what is nutritious and feeding me and fueling me to be happy, healthy, energetic, and which foods are not doing that.
Yeah. And I think a good point to say on that one is that everyone's body reacts different to food. So you sitting down and listening to what your body is telling you when you're eating um, could is very personal, which leads into the second point or the second tip. Learn to listen to your hunger and fullness cues. This means eat when you're hungry and stop when you are full. Now, another tip on top of this tip is slow down your eating. If you rush to finish your plate, the cues that your body is giving you are off. But if you slow down your food intake, your body has time to actually process what it's getting. So then it has more accurate cues.
Yes. And additionally, for tip 3, make peace with your food. And what I mean by this is to give yourself permission to eat and enjoy all foods. And like I said earlier in this podcast, anything in moderation is normally okay.
Yeah.
Um, so just if you feel like something, eat something. Do it within a normal portion size, but as Mar used her example of having a soda, if for some reason it's a Friday night and you're watching a movie and you want a soda or you want a glass of wine, that's fine. It's only bad when it's a vast overconsumption or a
Yeah.
chronic vast overconsumption.
And then another tip for you is to eat mindfully. This by this we mean eat without distraction, such as your phone, TV, or computer, and savor every bite, which is hard.
It's so hard nowadays.
Especially when you're eating by yourself, you want to do something while you're eating. But try on your next lunch break to take out your lunch when it's nice weather, go outside, sit on a bench in a park, and eat while doing nothing. And try to taste every flavor of your food. That is eating mindfully.
Yes. And then respect your body and respect your body for what it is and what it needs and just make peace um with the purpose of your body. We aren't designed, most of us are not designed to, have a supermodel body look, or we're not designed to look XYZ. So just understand that your healthy weight, your healthy body and shape is going to be different and unique to you. And just make peace with that.
The sixth tip is discover the satisfaction factor. This means eat foods that bring you satisfaction so that eating becomes more enjoyable and less stressful. Um, Oftentimes, we feel a lot of pressure of eating the right foods, and that's normal. But try to find the foods that also actually taste good to you. Whatever you see on the internet of like these superfoods and best meals, sure, try them. But if you want to add something else, or if you want to add a little bit of whatever, make it so that it is enjoyable for you so you can enjoy your meal.
Yes, and on top of that, a healthy meal is not chicken, rice, and vegetables. That you can mix it up. There's so many healthy foods out there. You don't have to. I know if you're busy, it's kind of hard to mix up your food, um, but there's so many types. And there's variety. There's so much that
Yeah.
your healthy meals can be so vastly different with so many different flavorings.
Yeah.
And so just use that as an outlet to figure out what kind of food you actually like.
And if it helps, write down the recipes or the things that you made that you really like so you can look back on it and be like, oh yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and then lastly, we talked about emotional eating, but we want to challenge you to deal with those emotions without using comfort foods or food at all. Instead, try to find alternative coping strategies that you might not have tried yet, such as meditation or going for a walk or journaling, or try talking to someone about what's been bothering you. This way, you can deal with those emotions in a probably healthier way.
Yeah, so those are our 7 tips. We hope that this is something that you kind of can sit on and think about and kind of self reflect on what your personal feeling is towards food and your relationship towards food. And maybe one of these tips can help you. Again, if you have any questions or you want us to dig a little deeper in something, let us know. But
Yeah.
is all we have for today's episode. So thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review.
See you next time.
Bye.
That's it for today's episode of The Brain Plate. Remember, small changes lead to big impact. Keep feeding your body and mind with intention. See you next time.